Well, I said I was taking a week off from making videos, but honestly I figured maybe I just need to review a game I actually like. Another childhood game of mine, the third of the holy trinity of PS2 mascots, Sly Cooper. For some reason, Sly, and by extension, most of Sucker Punch's games, never quite reached the height of popularity that the rest of Sony's exclusives did. You can always find people talking about Metal Gear or God of War. If you dig a little deeper, you can find some talking about Ratchet and Clank, Jak and Daxter, but Sly Cooper, not so much. Which is a shame because, at the very least, the first two are quality games and still very much playable today. But have they really aged well? Honestly, that's kind of a difficult question to answer because with any game I grew up with, I have permanent nostalgia goggles on for these, so I'm going to try to review this as objective as I can. But before I do the things the algorithm likes. Like, comment, etc., etc. You've heard it a million times, but it helps the channel, so thank you in advance. And without further ado, let's steal back the Thievius Raccoonus. So what type of game exactly is Sly Cooper? It's a linear 3D platformer with light collectathon elements and even lighter stealth elements. Honestly, even calling them stealth mechanics is a bit of a stretch, but you'll see what I mean in a moment. And you play as Sly Cooper, the latest in a long line of master thieves who have recorded their journey in the Thievius Raccoonus. And at the start of the game's story, Sly's dad is killed by a bunch of his old enemies, and they take all of the pages of the Thievius Raccoonus for themselves. And after growing up in an orphanage and meeting his friends, Bentley and Murray, Sly has teamed up with them to basically form a crew of thieves, and has finally decided to avenge his father and reform the legendary book. And the game is basically structured in 4.5 worlds, and in each world you have to gather these 7 keys from each level, and then you fight the boss and you move on to the next world. The game controls like a lot of other 3D platformers. You can run, double jump, swing your cane with square in a basic 2-hit combo that you can spam infinitely. You have circle, which is basically your context-sensitive climbing and sneaking button, which basically just means whenever you see blue sparkles or a hook, press circle. The issue I have playing this today is that basically all of these context-sensitive sections are completely automated. There's very little player input, and this may be a problem with just the HD collection. I don't know, it's been too long since I played the original. But sometimes it just fails. You'll be holding circle to sneak around a ledge, and you just fall straight off. It doesn't lock on properly. Since any of these circle button areas are context sensitive and are basically automated animations, there's very little player skill involved. That's the problem. The only challenges, if you can even call them that, is just waiting for an enemy to turn their searchlight away from you and then you just sneak past. That and the hook actually does require a bit of momentum to swing from these points. Other than that, it's mostly just a gimmick. Speaking of which, then we have our triangle moves. All of these are unlocked by opening the various safes at the end of each standard platforming level, which to get the combination for, you have to find all of the clues in the level. This is the only limited collectible. The other type of collectible are coins, which are honestly mostly useless. It takes 100 coins to get a lucky charm, and the charm just blocks 1 hit. That's it. Which, given you only have 1 health, so it's not useless by any stretch, but getting 100 coins takes a long time, so it's not exactly something you can plan around. It's more of just a bonus. But back to these triangle moves. Basically, these vaults contain one of 3 things. Either a completely new move, most of which are honestly useless, especially the decoy and the mine, which take multiple seconds to deploy, and in the case of the mine, takes even more time to activate. And when every enemy dies in 1 hit, and there's obviously very specific ways that you're supposed to complete these levels, they're not worth using. There's honestly only 2 abilities you're gonna be using for most of the game, which is the roll, lets you roll in a ball, which is just a faster way of moving, but only on flat ground or down slopes. If there's little bumps in the collision boxes for the platforms, it will stop your roll completely, and it is very annoying. And the other ability is the ability to speed up time, which actually is surprisingly well designed, because it does exactly that. Which, if you think the standard jogging is a bit too slow, which it is, then you can speed up time, and there you go, that's your sprint. But the trade-off is everything else moves faster too, including enemies and their projectiles and swinging platforms and things like this. And it's a way to make the game just faster paced overall, so I definitely like this one. The second thing that can be in these vaults are upgrades to those abilities. And once again, most of them are just kinda useless. The best one is the one that gives your roll an electric field around it, so you can actually just straight up kill enemies by rolling into them, and that's awesome, extremely useful, but most of the other ones you're not even going to notice. But there are a couple that upgrade Sly's, I guess, general healthiness. I don't even know what you would call it. It gives you immunity to dying in the water, because normally Sly can't swim, so the water kills him. And also somehow allows you to defy gravity, so even falling off a cliff doesn't hurt you either. So how does all of this tie into the stealth mechanics? Well, there are two types of security. You have enemies with spotlights, which essentially, if you get in the spotlight range, they see you and they shoot an undodgeable homing projectile toward you. And given you only have 1 health in this game, it's probably going to kill you. And if the projectile clips into a wall, or you have a horseshoe to protect you, in a few seconds they'll resume searching at your location to try and finish you off. So there's basically only one way to deal with these guys, which is get behind them and hit them. Late in the game, you actually get the ability to turn invisible, and one of the vault upgrades allows you to slowly creep forward while staying invisible. So this gives you one other way to deal with them, but primarily you're just supposed to sneak around them or jump over them and hit them. The other type of security are laser grids, which are pretty much everywhere. They're in probably over half the levels in the game. And these are actually pretty forgiving. If you get caught in a laser wire, it sounds an alarm and turns all the yellow lasers into red lasers. And when you walk into a red laser, then you get fried. But all you have to do is take out the alarm, and that gets rid of all of the lasers. The laser grids are actually used in pretty creative ways, combined with the level design. So I actually like this element quite a bit, but these two things are the only stealth parts in the entire game. Every other enemy you just kind of deal with like almost any other 3D platform of the time. You swing your cane once and they're dead. But at least what little stealth there is there does add a bit of flair to the levels, so I think it's overall a plus. So yeah, ultimately the gameplay is incredibly simple. It's kind of like Baby's first platformer, because there's very few things in this game that are actually challenging. Every platforming or enemy-based challenge has a very specific solution, and it very rarely goes outside the box. So you might be thinking, well, how is the game any good then? Well, that's where we get into the level design, of course. Because you can't be a good platformer without good level design. It is absolutely crucial. And this is going to sound a little familiar if you watch the Psychonauts review, but yeah, it is a linear 3D platformer with collectibles and little secrets and stuff. But honestly, if you thought Psychonauts was linear, these levels are almost Crash Bandicoot level of linear. Pretty much all of them are point A to point B, sneak past enemies, knock them out, jump over death-defying gorges or sneak around ledges, etc., you know. What keeps the levels interesting is usually each one has some kind of small gimmick, whether it's like flaming exhaust coming from these furnaces, or having to sneak around in a barrel because these weird auto turrets that shoot darts would kill you otherwise if you don't hide inside. And sometimes it just kind of comes down to the level theme. In one level, you might be navigating through a ship graveyard. In another level, you're exploring a casino with these Dobermans that have machine guns that you gotta sneak past. Or later in the game, you're exploring a Haitian swamp full of ghosts. And you get the point. It's your typical platformer design where each world has a theme. and each platforming level within those themes has a small theme of its own. The entire game has this nice cartoonish aesthetic to it. Now, some people might say that it's a furry game, and I wouldn't even be slightly surprised if Carmelita Fox created thousands of furries, because she's, another one of those characters. You know what I'm talking about. The Lola Bunny type.
Oh my.
But honestly, I found it pretty charming for the most part. Each level has appropriate goons for the theme of that world. Whether it's a bunch of walruses, different dog breeds, ghosts and snakes, or kung fu monkeys and stuff like that, you know? And so while the game is pretty simple, it's also fairly enjoyable just because of the pacing. That's something that you can never quite explain without playing the game for yourself, but this game is paced extremely well. And I think that's part of why I actually don't like the sequels as much as the first one. Yes, I'm one of those guys who likes the first Sly more than the second. It's pretty rare. But I think because the game is a linear platformer that never wastes your time, you're constantly moving linear mission to linear mission, you don't really stop and think about, oh, well, this is really simplistic and pretty easy, because you're too busy enjoying the game. It's kind of like Spyro 1 in that sense. And the game is about that long, too. You can 100% it in roughly 7 hours, and if you completely ignore the clue bottles, you could probably beat it in under 5 hours. You kind of have to put that into perspective, that if you break down each individual piece, the game honestly isn't revolutionary by any stretch of the word, doesn't do anything you haven't seen in other platformers or action-adventure games, but it's greater than the sum of its parts. The only problem I have with the level design is the gimmick levels, of course. I've probably said this a couple other times, but I am not a fan of gimmick levels in platformers. I think that's usually what developers do when they run out of ideas, which is why it's so surprising that there's this many gimmick levels in the first game in a franchise. I know a lot of people don't mind this, especially people who say like, oh, Spyro 3 is my favorite Spyro, or Crash 3 is my favorite Crash. But for people like me who actually like the platforming, that's the best part of the game without a doubt, every time I'm not doing that, usually what I'm doing is worse. And Sly Cooper is no exception. I don't think any of these minigames are bad except the racing one. The racing one is legitimately terrible. But every other one is just kind of okay. And so yeah, while I didn't hate the sniping sections, or actually the twin stick shooter sections that actually let you explore a level while you shoot stuff, those are actually kind of fun. I would honestly rather just see another traditional platforming level with some other cool gimmick, and maybe Sucker Punch ran out of ideas, maybe they just need to pad out the game more, I don't know, but these honestly just aren't that interesting. I guess lastly, I'll just briefly talk about the story and characters. This is a 3D platformer in the 2000s, so there's obviously not that much story here. Certainly less than Ratchet & Clank, at least. But yeah, as I said in the beginning, you're the latest in a long line of thieves. Your father was killed by the Fiendish Five. None of them really get that much development, except maybe Clockwork, since he has a history with the Cooper clan. I mean, is that really a spoiler? Come on. And so Sly and his buddies Murray and Bentley team up to avenge him and reforge the Thievius Raccoonus, the pages of which were scattered across each of the Fiendish Five's lairs. I think it's worth noting too that these boss fights are kinda shit, the worst of which by far is Ms. Ruby. It is literally a fucking rhythm game. Why? I don't fucking know. There's no rhythm tutorial before this either. It just shows up. I don't know, maybe some of Sucker Punch are a fan of Parappa the Rapper or something. I don't know. In any case, boss fight sucks. It is terrible. The only good boss fight in the game is against Panda King, because you can actually just hit him. What do you know? A boss fight where you can just play the game is the only good one. I'd say the Clockwork fight is also just okay, but there's an unnecessary jetpack section thrown in there, but the platforming section right after it kind of saves it, so it's okay. As for the characters, the only ones you get to really know are Sly, Bentley, Murray, and Carmelita. And honestly, the characters aren't that well defined in this game, even of the four that you get to know. They're developed better in the sequels, for certain. Sly has this issue where he sort of whisper reads a bunch of his lines in this game, and it's kind of weird. I don't know if this was just bad voice direction or what, but he's essentially supposed to be, you know, the suave leader of the group who obviously has a thing for Carmelita Fox and hits on her in literally every scene. Kind of refreshing in this day and age where that would probably never happen if the game came out today. Then we have Murray, who is just the getaway driver. He's a complete coward despite being a massive hippo, and that's really all there is to his character. I mean, he feels like he has something to prove in these races, but that's the only time it really comes up. He actually doesn't say that much. And then finally we have Bentley, the brains of the operation, and actually probably the funniest character too. He has some pretty good reaction lines in there.
I found a way out to Raleigh's hideout, but unfortunately, it is doomed to failure.
You're not gonna tell me I have to shoot myself out of that cannon.
I'm afraid that's the only way.
Now you're talking.
You're really scaring me, man.
And as for Carmelita, she's the cop. She's been trying to catch Sly Cooper for, I don't know, probably years at this point, but she can never quite catch up to him. She hates him, thinks he's some horrible criminal dude, until she has a slight change of heart at the end of the game. But honestly, she's pretty one note other than that. But the villains are certainly worse. Other than yelling at you a few times in some of the levels, they really don't have characters. They're just evil guys, and that's okay. So yeah, I guess if you're a fan of like children's games or I guess games for all ages, you know, Nintendo type of stuff, Sony used to make games for that audience. Like I said, the holy trinity of PS2 mascots were all sort of competitors for Nintendo. I mean, sure, none of them quite reached the popularity of any Nintendo mascot, but at least they were trying, and they were good games. And unlike Nintendo, these games actually had stories. They were kind of like an animated movie in a sense. And so I really like that about them, even if they haven't aged perfectly. So in conclusion, is Sly Cooper still a good game today? Yeah, definitely. I wouldn't say it's a masterpiece. I don't think it's really an amazing game either, but it is definitely a good game. That if you like 3D platformers and you like cartoon characters and things like that, you should definitely play it. That being said, it is a little hard to recommend if you're not a big fan of 3D platformers. I mean, there's probably a bit of crossover in there with the action-adventure genre, but certainly none with the stealth genre. I mean, there is no stealth. It's just contextual holding circle when you're in a sneaky area. But that being said, I really enjoy the characters, and despite how simple the story was, I like that too. I like the level design quite a bit. They managed to do a lot despite having sort of a shaky framework to work with. I just don't think having contextual platforming is a good idea because it takes away player agency. But at the end of the day, these games are definitely still playable. And honestly, the second one kind of just appeals to a broader audience because they decided to switch to a sort of sandbox level design, with some of the levels being linear levels like the first game, but others taking place in those small sandboxes. So it kind of has a bit more variety there, and the boss fights are definitely better in the sequels. But I still like the first game the most, just because it's just kind of one of those gaming purist type of games. You do one thing, and you do that thing for most of the game. Now here's the bad news though. The Sly collection was never properly ported to PS4 or by extension PS5. The HD collection is on PS3, and as far as I know, you can use PS Now to stream it onto your PS4, and by extension probably the PS5. But streaming is not the same. You're always going to have that input lag. So it's really up to you. If you have a PS3, definitely play it. If you're stuck with PS Now, well, I guess it depends on your internet connection. In any case, it's a great game. They should probably just fucking remaster it again. I mean, why not? It's basically free money. And hopefully, Sly Cooper gets revived someday, but it's not going to be from Sucker Punch. And I heard pretty mixed things about Thieves in Time, so no telling if that developer will make the next one or not. But it's sad that out of the Holy Trinity, only Ratchet & Clank has survived the test of time. Jak and Daxter kind of died a pitiful death with a really bad PSP game, and Sly Cooper kind of went out with a whimper. I never played Thieves in Time, so I couldn't really tell you how good it is, but I definitely never heard that it was an amazing game by any stretch, and I don't think anybody said it was as good as Sly 2. Sony doesn't really seem to be interested in making games for all ages anymore, but maybe someday they'll change their mind when this whole cinematic action game shit finally blows over. Hey guys, thanks for watching. The Spectrum guy finally managed to fix the internet, and the worst part is, I still have no idea what happened. I didn't even get an explanation. So hopefully things will be back to normal. But yeah, if you didn't see the post, doesn't really matter. I didn't have internet for like 4 days, and it sucked, as you might imagine. But I'm still going to try to review Deathloop. Even if nobody cares about it, I do, and I know at least a few of you do. So I think it'll make for an interesting video. That's about it. I'll see you next time, guys.